Dahala was no longer the quiet, forgotten land it once was. Under Liona's gentle rule, the kingdom began to breathe again. The fields that once lay dry were now green with harvest. The women, once silenced by fear and tradition, now held their heads high with pride and purpose. Liona, now known as Queen Nia Liona, led not with a crown heavy with pride, but with a heart full of healing and hope. She walked among her people, spoke kindly to the children, and listened to the cries of the widows. Her presence brought comfort, and her words brought strength. She built schools for girls, health huts for the sick, and safe shelters for women who had suffered in silence. The people of Dahala loved her deeply, not just because she was their queen, but because she had walked through fire and returned stronger. She did not wear revenge on her face. Instead, she wore grace, resilience, and quiet power. Her voice echoed through the land like a soft wind that stirred even the hardest hearts. But behind her strong eyes was a silent ache she never spoke of. In the quiet of the night, when the drums stopped beating and the fires burned low, Liona sat alone. Her fingers would brush the pendant Kojo once gave her, now worn not out of love, but as a reminder of the love that once held her heart and the pain that shattered it. No one knew the weight she carried. To the people, she was the queen who rose above betrayal. But in the silence of her room, she was still the woman who remembered the eyes of a man she once loved, a man who turned her wedding night into a nightmare, a man who later cried at her feet, begging for forgiveness. Too late. She tried to push his memory away. She buried herself in service, in kindness, in leadership. Yet sometimes, when she looked into the eyes of a young bride or heard a distant love song, her heart tightened, because though she had forgiven him with her lips, her soul still carried the wound. She often wondered where he was. Kojo, the prince who had lost everything. Was he eating well? Was he still angry at the world? Or had he changed? Did he regret it every night like she once cried every night? Still, Liona refused to let her pain define her. She poured herself into building a kingdom where no woman would ever suffer what she had suffered. A land where love meant safety, not fear. Where marriage meant partnership, not pain. People traveled from far villages just to see her speak. Poets wrote songs about her strength. Mothers whispered her name to their daughters as a symbol of courage. But none of them knew the full story behind her eyes. None of them knew how much strength it took to stand tall every day while holding a heart that still remembered pain. Dahala flourished. The people smiled. But in the center of it all was a queen who led with compassion, while hiding the ache of a love that once broke her spirit but could never break her soul. Kojo, once the proud prince of Dabasa, now walked alone, with nothing but guilt and shame for company. His royal robes were gone, replaced by a simple cloth wrapped around his tired body. His eyes, once filled with pride and power, now carried the weight of regret. Villagers often looked at him with curiosity, some with pity, others with judgment. No one saw a prince anymore. Only a broken man searching for something he had lost long ago. Peace. He wandered from one village to another, sleeping under trees, drinking from rivers, eating only what kind strangers gave him. Some chased him away, thinking he was mad. Others offered him shelter for a night, not knowing who he once was. But Kojo never told anyone his name. He no longer cared to be known. All he wanted was a second chance, not to reclaim a throne, but to redeem his soul. Slowly, something inside him began to change. In one village, he helped an old farmer rebuild his broken fence. In another, he carried water jars for a pregnant woman. He offered to work in return for a meal, never demanding, never complaining. The once arrogant prince now bowed his head and listened more than he spoke. People began to notice his gentle hands, his quiet smile, his willingness to serve. Still, there was a sadness in his eyes that never left. At night, when everyone slept, Kojo sat by himself and stared at the moon. He often whispered to the stars, "Liona, I'm sorry. I see it now. I see everything." He remembered her face on their wedding night, filled with love and hope, then fear and pain. That image never left him. It haunted him every day. In one village, a group of boys tried to beat a girl for refusing to serve them food. Kojo rushed forward, stopped them, and said in a firm but trembling voice, "Real men protect, not hurt. Never raise your hand to a woman." The boys laughed at first, but something in Kojo's voice silenced them. That moment marked a new purpose in his heart. He started talking to young boys, telling them stories, not of his glory days, but of his biggest mistake. He wanted them to learn from his fall, so no woman would ever suffer what Liona did. People began calling him the quiet teacher. Some still didn't know his real story, but they respected the way he lived. He asked for nothing, yet gave everything he had. He taught with humility, led by example, and treated even the poorest with dignity. But no matter how many lives he touched, his heart still ached. Redemption came slowly, like a gentle river washing away years of dirt. Kojo was healing, but deep down, he knew one wound could never fully close. The wound of losing the only woman who had truly loved him. Even so, he kept walking, kept serving, kept changing, because somewhere in his soul, he believed that true redemption was not in being forgiven, but in never making the same mistake again. Even though miles stood between them, Liona and Kojo's hearts still beat in rhythm, quietly, secretly, painfully. On sleepless nights, Liona would sit by her window in the palace of Dahala, gazing at the moon. Her fingers gently stroked the edges of her royal robe, but her mind wandered to the past. She didn't speak of him, not to her royal advisors, not to her loyal maidens, but in the silence of her room, she whispered his name, Kojo. She didn't understand why his face wouldn't leave her dreams. Even after all the pain, the betrayal, the tears, her soul still searched for him in her sleep. Sometimes she dreamed of the day he first held her hand, shyly smiling under the shade of the village trees. Other nights, she saw his face twisted in regret, falling to his knees, begging for forgiveness. She would wake with tears in her eyes, clutching her chest, asking herself, why does my heart still ache for him? Kojo, too, could not escape the pull of her memory. Every time he passed by a stream or saw a flower bloom, something reminded him of her. He would close his eyes and see Leona's gentle smile, hear her soft voice saying, "You're safe with me." In the middle of crowded villages, he would sometimes pause, thinking he heard her laughter in the wind. But it was just his heart playing tricks on him, because it missed her so deeply. Their souls remained tied like two threads woven into fate's fabric, stretched apart by life, but never truly separated. It was a strange kind of pain. Liona tried to focus on her duties, empowering women, healing broken communities, restoring the glory of Dahala. People praised her strength, her wisdom, her grace, but no one saw the invisible scar she carried, the one that had Kojo's name written on it. At the same time, Kojo continued his journey of redemption. He walked barefoot on rough paths, helped strangers, and preached kindness to young men. But in the quiet moments, when he was alone under the stars, he often whispered, "Liona, I still carry you in my heart." He didn't know if she thought of him, but he hoped she did. Sometimes, their dreams felt so real, it was as if they had met again, two souls touching through the realm of sleep. One night, Liona dreamed of Kojo reaching out his hand to her across a river. She hesitated, but then slowly reached back. She woke up crying, unsure of what the dream meant. That same night, miles away, Kojo dreamed of Liona standing in a field of sunflowers, smiling at him. When he woke up, his heart felt lighter, as if she had truly smiled at him again. Neither knew what fate was planning. Neither knew if their paths would cross again. But deep inside, their hearts still spoke a language only they understood, a language of love and pain, regret and longing. Even time couldn't erase what they once shared, because some bonds, no matter how bruised, remain unbroken. And sometimes, love doesn't end, it just sleeps, waiting for the right moment to awaken again. While Liona rebuilt Dahala with compassion and strength, a dark shadow began rising in Dabasa. Chief Endoro, still bitter after his son Kojo's downfall and ashamed of the council's judgment, grew restless. His pride wouldn't let him accept that a woman he once looked down on now ruled with honor and dignity. Blinded by jealousy and greed, Endoro began making secret deals, ones that would soon shake both Dabasa and Dahala to their core. It was during this time that a cunning and dangerous warrior named Wanza arrived in Dabasa. No one truly knew where he came from. Some said he was a banished soldier from the northern mountains. Others believed he was a rogue prince from a distant land. But what everyone could see was his fierce presence, his sharp mind, and his thirst for power. He didn't just walk, he stormed into every room, commanding attention and fear. Chief Endoro saw an opportunity in Wanza. He believed this man could help him regain control and silence the shame that still lingered from Kojo's exile. He welcomed Wanza with open arms, offering him land, gold, and a seat in the council. Slowly, Wanza started influencing decisions in the village. His words were smooth, his plans sounded wise, but behind his charm was a heart full of darkness. Wanza's real goal was not just Dabasa. He had his eyes on Dahala too. He knew if he could take over both lands, he would become the most powerful man in the region. He began whispering poison into the ears of the elders, turning them against each other. He sowed seeds of doubt, saying, "Liona may be queen today, but what if tomorrow a stronger leader rises?" He questioned her ability to rule and slowly tried to erase the respect people had for her. Soon, chaos began to spread in Dabasa. The peace that once existed started breaking apart. Disputes in the council grew louder. Farmers complained of higher taxes. Merchants were forced to pay heavy tributes to Wanza's men. Those who dared speak against him mysteriously disappeared. Fear became the new law. Chief Endro had unknowingly created a monster. At first, he thought he was in control, but Wanza was now the one pulling the strings. The very man he brought to regain his lost dignity was now threatening to tear everything apart. And while all this was happening, rumors began reaching Dahala. Liona heard whispers from travelers and merchants, rumors about a powerful new warrior rising in Dabasa, about unrest and fear, and about a possible attack. She knew something dangerous was coming, but she did not yet know how deep Wanza's plan ran. The people of Dabasa began to suffer. Families fled in the dark of night, seeking safety in other lands. Wanza's cruelty grew by the day. He declared himself protector of Dabasa, and soon his eyes turned toward Dahala. He began preparing for something far worse, a war that would challenge everything Liona had built. The storm was brewing, the peace was cracking, and somewhere between love, loss, and power, fate was once again preparing to test the strength of the Queen of Dahala. Wanza's hunger for power had no limits. As he tightened his grip on Dabasa, his eyes burned with desire to conquer Dahala next. But he knew that taking down Queen Liona wouldn't be easy. She was loved by her people, respected across lands, and admired even by those who had never met her. A simple attack wouldn't be enough. He needed something more dangerous, something that would shatter her image from within before raising his sword. So Wanza began spinning lies. He told the people that Liona was never the rightful queen of Dahala. He spread rumors that she had tricked the people with fake stories, that she had no royal blood, and that she had only used Kojo to climb to the throne. His words were poisonous, but they were carefully crafted, designed to sound like truth. He paid wandering storytellers to repeat his lies in marketplaces. He bribed elders to whisper doubts into the ears of villagers. Slowly, the seed of mistrust began to grow, even in hearts that once admired Liona deeply. But that was just the beginning of Wanza's evil plan. In secret, he sent his most loyal spies into Dahala. Their mission wasn't just to gather information, it was to dig into Liona's past, to find anything that could damage her forever. Wanza believed that if he could find a hidden scandal, a buried secret, or even fabricate one that sounded real, he could destroy her rule from the inside. He wanted the people of Dahala to turn against their queen before he even raised a sword. One night, Wanza stood before a map lit by firelight, his eyes fixed on Dahala. "Bring me something," he growled to his closest spy. "Something that will make her people hate her. A shame, a weakness, a lie so strong it becomes truth." The spy nodded and vanished into the darkness, carrying Wanza's wicked ambition with him. Meanwhile, Queen Liona remained unaware of the storm creeping toward her. She continued to lead with kindness, building homes for widows, educating young girls, and healing her land with compassion. But the whispers had started to reach her ears. A merchant had mentioned strange rumors spreading in Dabasa. A traveler had asked her if she truly came from royal blood. Her heart began to ache, not out of fear, but from the sadness that after all she had sacrificed, someone still wanted to tear her down. Still, Liona stayed strong, but Wanza's lies kept spreading like wildfire. In Dabasa, he declared Liona a fraud in front of the entire village. He raised a fake scroll, claiming it was an old royal document proving she was not the rightful heir. Though the scroll was forged, the people, confused and afraid, began to believe it. Wanza was now ready to take the next step. As his spies continued their search for a final blow, he began gathering his army. He trained men day and night. He armed them with weapons and anger. He told them, "We're not just going to conquer Dahala, we will cleanse it of its fake queen." And so, while the people of Dahala lived in peace, a war was silently being planned against them. One not just of swords and blood, but of lies. betrayal, and destruction. Wanza had lit the match. The fire was coming. Kojo had been wandering for months, carrying the weight of guilt like chains around his heart. Every village he passed, every person he helped, every silent prayer he whispered, it was all part of his journey to become a better man. He had changed. He was no longer the arrogant, impulsive husband who once hurt the woman who loved him the most. But deep inside, one thing still haunted him: Liona's eyes the day he broke her spirit. One evening, while resting under a tree in a distant village, Kojo overheard two traders talking. They spoke of a powerful warrior named Wanza who had risen in Dabasa. They mentioned his hateful words against Queen Liona and his plans to invade Dahala. Kojo's heart stopped. He sat still, every word piercing his soul like a knife. He could not believe what he was hearing. Someone was trying to destroy the woman he had once loved and broken. Suddenly, all his fears and regrets were pushed aside by something stronger: his need to protect her. Without wasting a moment, Kojo began his journey to Dahala. He didn't know what awaited him there. Would the guards even let him in? Would Liona face him, or turn her back on him forever? Would the people throw stones at him, remembering the man who had once hurt their queen? But none of that mattered now. Kojo knew he had to try. Even if he could never earn Liona's forgiveness, he had to warn her. He had to protect her. As he walked through dusty paths and crossed rivers, memories of their wedding night haunted him. The night everything went wrong. The night his anger shattered something beautiful. He had been blinded by ego and past pain, but now he saw everything clearly. He remembered Liona's laughter, her kindness, her strength. She didn't deserve to be a victim again, especially not by someone like Wanza. When Kojo finally reached the gates of Dahala, the guards froze in shock. Some of them knew him. Many remembered the shame he brought to the queen. Swords were drawn. He raised his hands in peace. "I come not to harm," he said, his voice low, heavy with regret. "I come to protect." News of his arrival spread quickly. The council gathered. Some wanted him arrested, others wanted him turned away. But Queen Liona, hearing his name, remained silent for a long time. Her heart stirred with mixed emotions: pain, anger, confusion, and something deeper she didn't want to name. Still, she allowed him to speak. Kojo stood before her, eyes lowered, voice trembling. He told her everything: what he had heard, what he had seen, and why he came. He made no excuses, asked for no forgiveness. "You owe me nothing," he said softly, "but your people, they deserve to be protected. Wanza is coming. His lies are spreading fast. I had to come, even if it's the last good thing I do in this life." Liona looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes held storms of memories. She didn't say a word, but she didn't turn him away. Kojo wasn't sure what that meant, but for the first time, he felt he had done something right. Not for himself, not for redemption, but for love, for truth, and for the queen he had once lost. And somewhere deep in her heart, Liona knew, even though wounds still bled, something had shifted. Kojo had returned, but not as the man he once was. This time, he had come as a protector. The moment Liona stepped into the royal courtyard, her heart skipped a beat. There he was, Kojo, the man who had once shattered her spirit on the night that was supposed to be the happiest of her life. She had dreamed of this moment 100 times, but never like this. Kojo, standing among the guards, bruised by travel, eyes full of pain, and most surprising of all, on his knees before her. The proud man she once knew was now humble, broken, and yet somehow stronger than ever before. Gasps filled the air. The villagers gathered quickly, murmuring in anger. Some shouted, "Banish him!" Others screamed, "He's a traitor! He doesn't belong here!" The people remembered everything: how Liona had suffered, how she had ruled with dignity, despite her pain. They couldn't believe that the man who once dishonored her had dared to return. Their voices grew louder, and the atmosphere burned with rage. Yet Kojo didn't flinch. He remained on his knees, head bowed, showing no pride, only regret. Liona looked at him with heavy eyes. So many emotions crashed within her: anger, sorrow, confusion, and somewhere deep, a quiet ache that had never fully left. She had buried that pain beneath her duties, beneath the love of her people, beneath the strength she wore like armor. But now, facing Kojo again, everything came rushing back. The way he once looked at her, the warmth they shared before the storm, the betrayal that tore them apart, and now, this man before her, pleading not for her love, but for her forgiveness, for a chance to protect the very people he once walked away from. Kojo raised his eyes slowly, tears glistening. I came not as a husband, not as a prince, but as a man who wronged you and this land. I do not deserve your mercy, but I beg you, let me serve this kingdom. Let me fight for Dahala. Let me protect what I once failed." The crowd grew silent, stunned by his words. Even the harshest voices paused. Liona's heart trembled, but she stood tall. Her silence spoke louder than any shout. She walked toward him, every step echoing across the courtyard. She stopped just inches away, staring into his eyes, the same eyes that once hurt her, now overflowing with remorse. For a moment, no one breathed. Then she spoke softly. "Do you think kneeling erases pain? Do you think protecting this land makes you worthy again?" Kojo lowered his head. "No, my queen, I know it does not. But I must try. I must make things right. Not for me, but for you, for the people, for peace." Liona turned her eyes toward the villagers. "What do we do with a man who has fallen, but tries to rise again?" Her voice was calm, but powerful. "Do we bury him in his past, or do we give him a chance to build a better future?" The villagers remained still, unsure. Liona looked back at Kojo. She saw the change in him, not just in his words, but in his spirit. The pain still lived in her heart, but so did wisdom. And sometimes, forgiveness was not weakness. It was power. She took a deep breath and said, "Stand, Kojo. You shall protect this land. But know this. Trust is not given easily. You must earn it." Step by step, Kojo rose slowly, his eyes filled with both hope and humility. And so, the journey of healing began, not just for Kojo, but for Liona too. The sun had not yet risen when the drums of war echoed across Dahala. The sky was heavy, clouds thick with tension, and the people stood in fear, knowing the hour had come. Wanza, with his army of ruthless warriors, marched toward the kingdom like a storm, fueled by greed and lies. He wanted to destroy everything Liona had built, her peace, her reign, her people. He thought fear would break her, but he didn't know the fire that now burned in the queen's heart. Liona stood at the palace gates, dressed in battle armor, her eyes fierce with courage. She was not just a queen today, she was a warrior. And beside her, to the shock of everyone, stood Kojo. The same man who once brought pain into her life, now stood ready to give his life to protect hers. The people had doubted him, some still whispered behind his back, but no one could deny what they saw in his eyes now: honor, courage, and a deep, quiet love that no longer needed words. The army of Dahala was small compared to Wanza's forces, but their spirits were strong. Liona moved through her soldiers, touching their shoulders, speaking hope into their hearts. And Kojo, he trained with the men, fought beside them, bled with them. He earned their respect not through title, but through action. For the first time in a long while, the people saw something different in him. He was no longer the prince they once feared. He was the protector they now trusted. When Wanza's army arrived, the earth trembled beneath their feet. Arrows flew through the sky. Swords clashed. War cries filled the air. The battle began with fury, but Dahala did not break. Liona fought at the front lines, fearless and bold, striking down enemies like the warrior queen she had become. Kojo was never far from her side, shielding her, fighting with fire in his heart. Every swing of his sword was a silent apology. Every wound he took was a promise to never fail her again. But it wasn't just strength that held Dahala together. It was love, a love that had once been shattered, but now burned brighter than before. In the middle of war, when Liona was cornered by Wanza's fiercest guards, it was Kojo who fought his way through the blood and chaos to reach her. They stood back to back, defending each other, two hearts beating as one. In those moments, their past pain became their power. Every hurt, every scar, every tear, it gave them strength beyond understanding. Even Wanza, watching from a distance, was shaken. He thought he could break Liona by turning her people against her, by bringing back the man who once hurt her. But what he didn't know was that pain had forged her into something unstoppable and had turned Kojo into a man no longer ruled by pride. As the sun finally pierced the clouds, Dahala's flag still stood high. Wanza's army began to fall back, their spirits broken by the unity they couldn't destroy. The people of Dahala cheered through tears, not just because they had won, but because they had witnessed something rare. Two souls who had lost each other, finding strength in forgiveness, rising through pain and standing tall in love. And as Kojo held Liona's hand beneath the rising sun, the people didn't see a broken couple anymore. They saw a king and queen reborn, not just by battle, but by the fire of love that had survived the storm. The battle raged on, fierce and unrelenting. The clash of swords and the cries of warriors filled the air like thunder. Blood stained the earth, and yet, Liona stood tall, fighting with every breath, protecting the land she had poured her soul into. Her people looked to her for strength, and she gave them hope with every strike, every command, every glance that promised they would not fall today. But in the heart of the chaos, danger crept silently. Wanza, ruthless and cunning, had planned one final move. A surprise attack meant to end the queen's life and shatter Dahala forever. From the shadows, one of his fiercest warriors rushed toward Liona with a poisoned blade, aiming straight for her heart. Everything happened so fast, yet in that single heartbeat someone else moved faster. Kojo. Without thinking, without hesitation, he threw himself in front of her, taking the deadly blow straight into his side. The force knocked him to the ground, blood pouring from the wound. Time seemed to freeze. Liona turned, eyes wide with horror, as she dropped to her knees beside him. The man who had once broken her now lay dying in her arms, because he chose to protect her, even if it meant losing his life. The battlefield faded from her vision. All she could see was Kojo's face, pale and trembling, but still trying to smile through the pain. His lips whispered, "I'm sorry. I just wanted to make it right." And in that moment, something shifted deep inside Leona's heart. All the anger, all the pain, all the questions melted into tears as she held his hand tightly, refusing to let go. But she couldn't break, not now, not when her people still needed her. Liona gently laid Kojo down, stood up with fire in her eyes, and raised her sword high. Her voice echoed across the battlefield, calling every soldier to rise, to fight, not just for her but for love, for honor, for everything they had lost and everything they still had to protect. Her strength became their strength. Her tears became their war drums. Her fury became their fire. The people of Dahala fought with new courage, striking with hearts full of purpose. Even the wounded rose again, driven by their queen's pain, by the sight of the man who had once hurt her, now lying in sacrifice for her. Wanza's forces began to crumble under the storm of unity and love that no weapon could defeat. And as the enemy fled, defeated and broken, Liona rushed back to Kojo's side. He was barely breathing, his body weak, but his eyes opened just enough to see her face again. She whispered words of healing and hope, her tears falling on his wound like drops of magic. The village healers came, and though it was a long and uncertain fight, they did everything to save him. Kojo's sacrifice didn't just save Liona's life, it healed a kingdom, reunited hearts, and reminded everyone that love, no matter how broken, still holds power. And in the end, it was not just a victory of swords, but a victory of truth, sacrifice, and the kind of love that rises from pain and blooms again in the heart of healing. Days turned into weeks, and Kojo's body slowly began to heal. But it wasn't just his wounds that were healing. It was his soul, his spirit, the man within. He no longer looked like the same Kojo who had once hurt the woman he claimed to love. The fire in his eyes had changed. It was softer now, deeper, filled with remorse and growth. He spent most of his days in silence, watching the people of Dahala rebuild their homes, their lives, their hope. And in those quiet moments, he finally understood what love truly meant: sacrifice, patience, and respect. Liona, too, watched him from a distance. At first, her heart stayed guarded. Pain doesn't vanish just because someone changes, but she saw the difference in him. He no longer tried to win her with words. He helped in silence, tending to wounded villagers, building shelters, guiding lost children back to safety. He asked for nothing, not even forgiveness, and that touched something deep within her. One afternoon, as the golden sun bathed Dahala in light, Liona walked into the village garden where Kojo sat under a tree. He looked up, surprised, but didn't speak. She sat beside him quietly. There was no crown on her head, no armor on her shoulders, just a woman sitting next to the man who once broke her heart, now trying to rebuild her trust without asking for it. She looked at him and said softly, "I don't love the man you were, but I see the man you've become, and I respect him." Kojo's eyes welled up. He didn't try to speak. He just nodded, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. That moment changed everything. It wasn't a dramatic reunion, not a fairy tale kiss under the moonlight. It was slow, gentle, real. Day by day, they started to talk again, not about their past, but about the future. They walked through the village hand in hand. They shared laughter over evening fires. They sat by the river, watching the stars in silence. Love didn't rush in. It grew again, like a seed watered by patience and care. And this time, it was different. There was no fear, no dominance, no control. It was a love built on honesty, on mutual respect, on understanding each other's pain and choosing each other anyway. The villagers saw this and began to embrace their union again, not because they were royalty, but because they had shown what true forgiveness and growth looked like. Together, Liona and Kojo began to lead a new era for Dahala, not as queen and husband alone, but as two souls who had journeyed through fire, lost each other, and found a new version of love that was stronger than before. Their love wasn't perfect, it was real. And in that truth, they became not just rulers of a land, but symbols of healing for every broken heart that still believed in second chances. And so, a new love was born, not from what was lost, but from what was found in the ruins: forgiveness, redemption, and a bond stronger than pain. If this story touched your heart, then remember, everyone deserves a second chance. And true love is not about perfection. It's about growth, healing, and forgiveness. Liona and Kojo's journey reminds us that even the deepest wounds can be mended, and broken hearts can find their way back to each other, stronger, wiser, and filled with hope. Sometimes, the pain we carry leads us to the love we never knew we needed. And sometimes, the person who once hurt us becomes the one who protects our soul. Life is unpredictable, but love is powerful when it is real and reborn from truth. So if you believe in redemption, in second chances, and in the strength of a woman's heart and a man's transformation, then this story was for you. Please don't forget to like this video if you felt even a single tear. Share it with someone who needs to hear this story today. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more heart-touching African tales that will move your soul and awaken your spirit. Your support means everything to us. Thank you for watching.